Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who are improving the world around them. They are doing these things locally, globally, and digitally as a part of what it means to be in a service club. This particular service club, the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, is one of 36,000 Rotary clubs around the world. It is a club that is not only dedicated to service above self, which all Rotary clubs are, but also to tremendous flexibility for those who have a heart for improving the lives of others, but may have schedules that make it incredibly different to be part of a group that regularly meets. So if you're curious about that, feel free to take a look at our site. The easy way to get there is via rotary.cool. And if you're curious about Rotary generally, rotary.org will get you to that. Our speaker today is going to talk about what makes for a psychologically rich and meaningful life. He is a philosopher at the University of Chicago. You can read his full bio by pausing this podcast or this video and taking a look at the page. And we will jump right into talking to him because we are so excited to have him as our guest. Shige, what a pleasure to have you. Thank you for taking your time. Welcome to the Rotary E Club of Silicon Valley.
Thank you so much for having me. Just one minor correction. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a professor of psychology. Uh, so, I'm not a philosopher, but similar enough, I think. So the first thing I wanted to say is that actually, I was born and raised in Japan, and I received the Rotary International Scholarship as a college student. And that was really the only reason why I was able to study in the United States and then decided to come to United States for graduate school and then eventually become a professor here. Uh, Prior to that, my dream was to work for Ministry of Education in Japan. So my career and life trajectory completely changed thanks to Rotary scholarships. So I wanted to thank Rotary Club first. So I've been empirically exploring the question of what is a good life? And of course, philosophers have talked about this ever since Socrates, Aristotle, and so forth. And in psychology, at least, we essentially examined two answers to this question. The first one is probably very familiar one to everybody. Happy life, where the person who lived that life feels quite happy, satisfied with where things turned out. Okay? So there are lots of positive emotion, not so much sadness, anger and disappointment and things like that. But of course, some people criticize a happy life being potentially selfish life, right? So in 1989, Carol Riff, professor of psychology at the University of Wisconsin, wrote the famous paper critiquing my advisor's Ed Diener's paper, actually, entitled Happiness is Everything, or Is It? In this article, she argued that if Hitler was happy, then did he live a good life? And of course, the answer is no. So she proposed the alternative model, which centers on eudaimonic well-being or meaningful life. So if the happy life is to make ourselves happy, then a meaningful life is the life to make other people happy, even at the expense of one's own happiness. Some of you might like books, novels. One of my favorite writer is Donna Tartt, who wrote The Secret Histories, Goldfinch, and so forth. So when she published the last book, Goldfinch, about 10 years ago, she went on to Cherry Rose interview. And Cherry Rose asked the questions. What kind of questions were you grappling with while writing this book? And her answer really surprised me. She said, what is a good life? Is it the personal happiness to make ourselves happy or to make other people happy even at the expense of one's own happiness? So she posed the same questions that everybody asked, philosophers asked, and treat these two life, happy life and meaningful life, as if it's really, really far away, right? Almost diametric opposite. So we studied happiness and meaning in life last 30 years or so. We have lots of data. One of the biggest surprise was that actually the people who are happy with their lives uh, tend to be also reporting that their life are meaningful. Those people who say their life is meaningful tend to be happy. So these two things are actually very, very tightly correlated. Correlation coefficient of almost zero point 0.6. So father-son height correlation is typically zero point 0.5, so it's even higher. So that's quite a bit of correlation. But one of the puzzle in the literature was that when you look at who is happy, who says their life is meaningful, then these are the people who are very extroverted, like to socialize, talk to people, very conscientious, very hardworking, right? Agreeable, so they have a very good relationship with others. They are not really contentious, right? And they don't worry about things too much. They're not neurotic. In personality psychology, we use this big five traits to characterize all kinds of personality. And four out of the five dimensions are covered by happy life and meaningful life. Again, extroversion, lack of neuroticism, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. One big dimension that is missing is open to experience. The type of person who like to, you know, do new things, read poetries, and really enjoy exploring the world, intellectually as well as physically and socially. So the puzzle to us was that, so what is the open to experience type of good life? If happiness and meaning is not really capturing that, what might capture that? And that's where the third dimension comes into play, that what we call psychological richness. So this is the richness in terms of experiences, lesson learned, and the stories you accumulated over time. So just like the material richness, right, can be quantified by the amount of money, assets you have, psychological richness can be quantified in terms of the number of interesting, unique stories you have and experiences you have. So we have empirical study following up the college students who study abroad. At the beginning, the students who were interested in study abroad, but during that semester stayed on campus. And the people who actually went to, Spain and Italy and so forth, they were not different in terms of happiness, meaning, or psychological richness. But every week we surveyed, and by the end of the semester, there was a huge difference in psychological richness between the people who went to study abroad and the people who stayed. Although in terms of happiness or meaning, there were no difference. And interestingly, every week we ask, what kind of activities did you engage in during the week? Did you play video game? Did you volunteer? Did you go galleries and concerts? And it turned out it was artistic engagement that uh, that was key. That the study abroad group engaged in more, and then that enhanced psychological richness. So by now we have lots of data to suggest that psychological richness is most strongly correlated with the openness to experiences, followed by extroversion in terms of personality traits. We also know what kind of activities and experiences seems to contribute to psychological richness. So study abroad is one. Taking a walk and meeting new people, doing something new every day, that is also another one. Curiosity is very strongly correlated with psychological richness, but not as strongly correlated with happiness or meaning in life. So we have accumulated a lot of evidence to suggest that psychological richness is different from happy life or meaningful life. And also the predictors and the outcomes of the psychological richness seems to be very different from the happy life or meaningful life. So that's about 10 minutes. So maybe I will pause here and take questions and then continue.
Absolutely. What we'll do is we'll introduce the folks who have joined the recording. When I call your name, please wave at the camera. We've got a nice set of our members here. In Walnut Creek, here in the Bay Area, is Shags Shagrin. In Houston, Texas, Rory Olson. In the Tucson area, David Andrew. In Eastern Italy, Cecilia Babkirk. And joining us from an office somewhere, but he was so interested in the topic that he, he had to do it, is Raj Bandari. All right, here in the Bay Area. So to kind of put the questions in motion, there is this distinction between psychological richness and happiness that you describe. Can you speak a little bit about the cultural influences or cultural disparities that may exist regarding happiness and psychological richness? Is it the case that a bunch of people in Bhutan, just find this very easy and people here in California do not, for example?
Yeah, so the happiness, we have a lot of cross-cultural data. Psychological richness is a relatively new concept, so we don't have as much, cross-cultural data. In terms of happiness, one of the most interesting thing is just definition of the happiness, how culture matters in here. So ancient Greek defined happiness, the Greek word was eudaimonia. You is good, daemon, so the spirit, good spirit on your side. So that was more of the good luck and fortune. If good spirits are on your side, then you are happy. And in 2013, we published this paper where we essentially collected all the data from 30 countries, the dictionary definition of happiness. So in Japanese, happiness is kofuku or shiawase. So we'll look it up in the Kojien, the most authoritative dictionary. And then we do the same thing in Norway, Germany, India, Kenya, and so forth. And when we look at the content of how people define happiness in different culture, essentially 80%, 24 out of 30 countries had good luck and fortune as a primary definition of their happiness. US was one of them that did not have that. So in the US, it became the satisfaction of one's desires and goals. In the end, it's a pursuit of happiness. Happiness is construed as something we can actively chase. But traditionally, if you consider that as a good luck and fortune, it's not something you can actively, chase or pursue. So that brings a lot of different kinds of implications. So when you have this very agentic view of happiness, many among Americans, then people tend to equate personal success or career success with happiness. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what's difficult is that when you feel unhappy, you feel like you're a failure. And that is the happiness trap, what we call happiness trap. That if you consider happiness as a good luck and fortune, then unhappiness is simply unluckiness. So it doesn't hurt personally as much. But currently in the United States and some other countries, that happiness became so equated with the personal success that I think it is interesting, cultural variations happening right now.
So thinking about that difference, having agency over what represents happiness in one's life, having been a student in Japan myself for a year and learning about Japanese culture, I think of things that I've encountered like the concept of amae and
Hmm.
amaeru. Um, and please correct my definition if it's off, but amai is a kind of dependency where you are able to rely on someone else indulging you when you may not be at your best, but that
Hmm.
emphasizes the strong connection that you have and the ability you have to trust that person.
Hmm.
So I can see that as something that would be a source of happiness and psychological richness that isn't necessarily a function of luck or lucky circumstances. And so I'm curious there if you have thoughts on the differences between, say,
Hmm.
American and Japanese culture with regard to a factor such as that.
Yeah, so amae is a very interesting construct that the Japanese have this tendency that's assuming that somebody will help you out. So the baby's complete dependency on mother is the primary example of babies am I. You don't have to even really cry loud to get the attentions and get fed. So uh, all the babies have that, Americans, everyone, but just this amaya continues among the Japanese adults, like men. Right? So the most interesting difference, I think, here is that there's an empirical study about support seeking, help seeking, and Japanese actually do not seek support and help from others as much as like Americans. And in part because A, you don't want to burden somebody else, your friends. But the second one is even without me saying, they should be recognizing I'm in trouble and they should be offering some help. So that's the amaya. And there is an easiness and comfort in that, right? The relationships based on amaya. So you don't really have to say anything. Just the support will come to you if you have the right kind of relationships.
Nice. Coming back to the difference between happiness and psychological richness,
Mhm,
uh, Raj in the chat asked a little bit about how we understand psychological richness.
mhm,
What are things that really distinguish it from happiness, and what are
yeah,
things the sense of curiosity and intellectual exploration, was
mhm,
one you mentioned in the piece, but also I'm curious what misconceptions there may be about psychological richness.
mhm. So one of the interesting example I think here is this weekend experience. So I did the focus group with my undergraduate students. Ask what was the happy event over the weekend, meaningful event over the weekend, and the psychological rich event. And the psychological rich event, one person said, "Oh, I saw this guy in the lounge of my apartment, half naked, typing and working on. Very strange. I've never seen that before." So that was an interesting experience. But what was puzzling was that it wasn't hot. So why was he naked? Second, he wasn't really like well built, so he wasn't like showing off his body or anything. So she came back and then thought, wow, what an interesting experience. I couldn't figure out what he was doing. Okay. And okay, that has some element of psychological richness, such as novelty and interestingness. But we call that is not psychological rich experience because the way she viewed the world and themselves did not change at all. On the other hand, there was another student who said, "Oh, last weekend I went to professional wrestling match." Like what? Interesting. Because she had never been to professional wrestling match before. She went there with friends with all kinds of stereotype of professional match. When she got there, she was really surprised that there were small children like cheering for these professional wrestlers. And it turned out WWE does a lot of anti-bullying campaign. So these kids who are bullied at school, they see these sort of ridiculous looking men as a heroes. And her experiences were so much joy and agony and so forth, but also like came back with completely different view of the world. And her stereotype was totally shattered. So it's not a necessarily happy event or particularly meaningful event because meaningfulness usually has something useful. I did something for others, made some difference in the world. So in that sense, that going to professional wrestling match is not really contributing to society much. Yet it was very interesting, novel, emotionally complex, and that came with the perspective change. So that's in essence very psychologically rich experience. And that's why things like study abroad is particularly psychologically rich because it is very difficult. When I first did that study abroad, I couldn't understand what people were saying. And I had so many humiliating experiences. Like I pick up the phone for uh, in my dorm, and I had a roommate. So always, is Mike there? Nope. Can I take a message? Oh, could you tell such and such call? And I can never catch the words. So I always say, could you spell out? And one day I'm spelling out, right? Listening. Hisfather. And I say, okay, thank you very much. And, hung up. And I look, his father, oh gosh, I couldn't catch that it was Mike's father who was calling. So anyway, the study abroad has a lot of challenging, unhappy moments, but at the same time, you really learn something new from these kinds of challenging experiences. So I think that's the difference between the just happy experience or happy life is predominantly positive, emotions and events. And then the meaningful life is really just you're making difference in the world in you know, some way, very concrete way. Where psychological richness is really variety of interesting experiences. And you learn something new from there and grow. And eventually, one of the items is on the deathbed, I'm likely to say I've seen and learned a lot. Okay, so essentially, wisdom uh, is likely outcome of pushing your boundaries, going beyond comfort zone and having a lot of multiple perspectives so that you really understand and can empathize with others. And a happy life and meaningful life, you could do that too, but you don't have to explore, go beyond your comfort zone to achieve happiness or meaning per se. So that's the main difference.
Excellent. We've got plenty of questions that have popped up. I want to start with Dave, Dave, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, you were talking about the perception, or I don't know, perception of happiness uh, from with different cultures, and I was thinking, I read surveys. I don't know how scientific they are that Scandinavian countries
Mhm.
typically those people rate at a high level of happiness, and I
Yep,
wonder if
yep.
you could comment on that and
Hmm.
why that is. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, World Happiness report every year who are the happiest in the world. And over the last 20 years, usually Scandinavian country, Denmark, more recently Norway and Finland rank really high. And BBC went to, Denmark and asked, so what's the secret? And the Danish people said, well, we don't expect that much. We are grateful for what we have. So one of the main factors, of course, the Scandinavian country have very good social welfare and so forth. So that's given, right? That the bottom, the poor people are not as unhappy as other countries. So the bottom is higher. But at the same time, it is very interesting that they are really good at managing their ambitions and desire. So William James famously said self-esteem is a function of success divided by the ambitions. And essentially happiness is the same way. So you have two ways to maximize happiness. You can maximize your success. The more success you have, the happier you get. At the same time, with more success, we tend to upgrade our ambitions as well. So as numerator goes up, denominator goes up, then the ratio doesn't change. And what Scandinavians are really good at is managing their desire and ambition. So by making the denominator smaller, the ratio, the score could increase. So American struggle seems to be that we are so misguided by just focusing on the personal success, expanding the personal success without really managing our ambitions. So on average, the older adults are happier than the middle-aged individuals and so forth. And in part because older individuals are better at managing their ambitions and desires as well, I think.
Excellent. The
Thank you.
the idea of understanding certain concepts that we deal with regularly, but may not explore in the level of detail that I think your research has kind of shined a light on the potential of looking at things in that way. Raj asks about happiness, right? So we all understand that that's a good thing to seek. Uh, he asks why wisdom is a good thing. Is there something within the framework of your writing, of your thinking, that makes an explanation, kind of at the ready for why wisdom is something we should seek?
Hmm. So this is not my theory, but the famous psychiatrist and the writer Erik Erikson wrote this in 1950s. So he extended the Freudian essentially concept of ego development into from the childhood to the adulthood. So he is the guy essentially made identity crisis of the youth very famous. So you have to explore yourself to really figure out, your identity. You need to know who you are. That's the developmental task for the teenagers in early 20s. But then once you get married, then the next stage is the generativity because you are raising your children, or even if you don't have a children, you're contributing to your communities and so forth. So generativity, are you generative? Are you giving to the society is a very big developmental task. If you're not doing that, then stagnation is the sort of the outcome. So identity crisis, midlife crisis is usually comes from not enough generativity during the adulthood. But then once you move on to the final stage of life, then he says the wisdom is the ultimate prize. And if you don't have the wisdom, then the outcome is despair. What was my life for? Right at the end of your life. So this is the Ericksonian theory of maturation, human development. And there, the wisdom is considered as the prime, outcomes and uh, reward for essentially lifelong explorations, making sure you know who you are, identity explorations. You explored enough, you are generative enough, and then finally you can integrate all the experiences you had into certain your own kinds of philosophy of life. And moreover, because you have the wisdom, you can continue to give back to the communities and give wise advice and so forth. So that's what the oldest age required. Physically, you might not be able to contribute, do the things, firefightings and things like that. You cannot. But at the same time, you have all kinds of knowledge and experiences. So, of course, traditionally, any society, right? Who do you go for advice? The older people, because they have seen, they have done. Um, but as we all know, not every single old person has the wisdom, unfortunately. So there are individual differences. And the more you explore the world and learn something new every day, I think you are closer to obtain a wisdom. And some people might not care about wisdom, but in general, I think it is highly prized reward of human life.
So that moves me in the space of thinking about a question that Cecilia asked in the chat about how some people can be dropped into a completely different environment than they grew up in and
Mhm,
thrive.
mhm,
Others seek to stay in what is most recognizable and comfortable. Is this something that has been a part of your research? I can imagine that the kind of wisdom that we prize in people who have had a psychologically rich life are people who would exhibit some of the characteristics you talked about before. But looking at it from the frame of like, well, if someone is in a totally new environment and thrives there, that sounds like a very practical application of the idea.
mhm. Definitely. So I start my book with the example of my father, who is 91 years old, who still lives in the same town where he was born. And essentially, his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, entire ancestors were the farmers. And he was the first son, so he took over the farm. He married, with a woman from the next village. He had three children, and I'm the first son and only son of the family. And I left my hometown as soon as I turned 18 and went to Tokyo to go to my college. So um, this is the really so my dad could have moved to booming town nearby and made a lot more money, but he stayed, kept on his family traditions and so forth. And in the end, he's very happy. He's very content. Whereas me, I went to Tokyo. From there, I got the scholarships. I went to Maine, came back, graduate, and went back to New York City. Got PhD, got a job at Minnesota, moved to University of Virginia, moved to Columbia University, went back to University of Virginia, came to University of Chicago now. So it's just completely different lives. And when I think about myself, I'm pretty happy, but I feel like my dad is happier than I am because he still has his childhood friends and he still hung out with his friends. I mean, tight knit, I mean, very comfortable, supportive environment entire his life. And that was his life. And I think that's a good life. And I'm not by no means criticizing that at all. But there is another kind of life, of course. Many Americans and their family moved from somewhere else, completely different, and then built their new lives. And there is something admirable about that as well. And of course, who thrive in a new culture and new environment? I think it's a difficult question um, because there are a lot of luck, factors as well. But I think the mindset is that the people who are, very open to new experiences and new culture, of course, are much more likely to thrive. My best friend from college started his PhD in political science at Columbia University. And after 2 years, he was complaining about America and just New York City and Japan is so much better. And of course, he went back to Japan, right? He couldn't stay in the United States and thrive. So I think there are many attributes that differentiate who are likely to succeed in a familiar environment and who are likely to succeed in a new environment. But even then, there must be a lot of, luck and fortune that play a role.
Well, that makes sense. I'll ask one more question before we wind down. Your story of your experience and your father's experience seems to do a lot to highlight the difference between the idea of happiness and the idea of psychological richness in many ways, and the overlap that may not necessarily be there. One space where I feel people tend to find a lot of happiness and psychological richness is in service to others.
Mhm.
As a Rotarian asking this question in a Rotary setting, there's a certain self-serving quality to it. But I would guess that were there research out there that focuses on people who have lengthy experiences in service clubs, who regularly get together with others to improve the lives of people in their community, are
Mhm.
experiencing both happiness and psychological richness, perhaps because of that understanding of where the denominator should be.
Mhm. So we don't have the data in terms of the people who do a lot of service, but we have a lot of data about religiosity. So some people are very religious. And in some sense, religious people tend to be more politically conservatives and so forth. So in general, psychological richness is not correlated with the political orientation. If anything, it's more leaning toward political liberalism. So I thought the religious people might not report as much psychological richness as less religious people, but I was completely wrong. We have a lot of data, and it shows that the religious people report much higher level of psychological richness than not so religious people. An interesting study found that what people do on Sunday and then the religious people go out there, not just going to church, but they go to bar or restaurants and socialize with others way more than non-religious people. Non-religious people tend to stay home, play video games, and things like that. So obviously, those things do not contribute to either happiness or psychological richness. And as I said, psychological richness in part come from meeting someone new and doing something new. So I think that the people who do a lot of service do so in the same location, perhaps, but with the different kinds of people. So I think that they have more opportunity to see a different kinds of people, not just at work, but outside of the work and outside of your neighborhood. You have some third, place to interact and with very different kinds of people, which is, I think, very, very enriching. And of course, it adds to your meaning, and also happiness comes from a lot of close relationships. So I think certainly this is one activities that could enhance all three dimensions.
Well, I think one of the things that happens in a service club and in a regularly attending church experience, religious experience, is that there there are there is a welcoming of constant new lessons, right? That idea that somebody's going to give you something to think about.
Mhm,
And I certainly treasure that as a part of the experiences I get in Rotary.
mhm.
It has absolutely been that case today. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'll wind things down. I'd like to say to everybody who is listening to this podcast or watching this video, thank you for spending your time with us. We believe that how you choose to spend your time and how you choose to focus your ability to make the lives of others better is very much a part of how you can be happy and experience psychological richness. And so we are very glad that you are part of that with us today. Feel free to share this recording with others, to dive into our archives of our meetings. If you go to rotary.cool, which will get you to our club site, at the very top there is a link that says meetings. That's our archive, and you can see all kinds of programs that we have shared with others from speakers all over the world. Speaking of speakers, we always like to hand it back to our speakers for the final word. So, Shige, what would you like for people to have clearly in mind as they finish this recording?
Yeah, I would like to say that we all desire different things. So I think I don't want to misspeak that I'm encouraging people to have a psychological rich life. That's not my message. My message is if you think you want to maximize happiness, there are a lot of ways you can do it. So go ahead, do it, but focus on small happiness, the everyday interaction with your loved one. The meaning for life is wonderful, no doubt, but it is also comes with the focus and repetitions and dedication for extended period of time. You cannot have just a quick dose of a meaningful life. So that's the dedication you need. And if meaning and happiness are not for you, then maybe psychological richness is something you might appreciate and you might pursue. And in the end, ideally, we will all want to have all three and live in the three dimensions. So, wishing you a rich life, happy, meaningful, and psychologically rich life.
Wonderful. Thank you, and thank everyone. We'll see you next week.